The wind carried the scent of salt and damp earth through the tall pine trees at Sandcliff Cove. The secluded coastal village in Oregon was serene, with jagged cliffs and crashing waves creating an otherworldly backdrop. On the third day of her honeymoon, Celine Whitaker stepped out of the cabin she shared with her husband, Arden Luxford, for an evening walk. She told him she wanted to explore the cliffside trails, a favorite pastime that brought her peace. Arden remained behind, sketchpad in hand, distracted by his drawings. Hours passed and Celine did not return. The night deepened and Arden grew uneasy. The trails were known to be treacherous, especially in the dark, with sharp turns and steep drops that could easily disorient someone unfamiliar with the terrain. By dawn, with still no sign of Celine, Arden called the local authorities. Detective Asher Rowland arrived early that morning, his years of experience with missing persons cases etched in the lines of his face. The disappearance of hikers along Oregon's coastline was not uncommon, but something about this call unsettled him. He surveyed the couple's cabin, taking in the remnants of what was supposed to be a joyous occasion, an unfinished bottle of wine, hiking boots left by the door, and Celine's scarf draped over the arm of a chair. Arden, pale and tense, recounted the events leading to Celine's disappearance. The search began swiftly, with officers, volunteers, and neighbors combing the trails and surrounding woods. The cliffs were notorious for their danger, and the ocean below was unforgiving. Midday brought the first significant clue. Celine's scarf was found snagged on a jagged rock near the edge of a sheer drop. Bloodstains marred the fabric, faint but undeniable, raising questions about what might have happened. The discovery deepened the searchers' urgency, though the cliffs offered no other immediate answers. A neighbor, Marjorie Hale, who owned a nearby bed and breakfast, reported seeing Arden walking near the cliffs late the previous night. Her observation cast a shadow over his otherwise cooperative demeanor. Meanwhile, the area around the cliff revealed faint disturbances in the soil. Footprints, scuffed dirt, though they were inconclusive as to whether they belonged to Celine, Arden, or someone else entirely. As the day waned, the efforts to locate Celine intensified. Portable floodlights illuminated the trails, and the voices of searchers echoed through the forested terrain. The cliff edge, dark and menacing under the moonlight, became the focal point of the investigation. The wind howled through the pines, carrying with it an uneasy stillness that seemed to settle over the entire cove. Back at the cabin, Arden sat alone, staring at the empty fireplace. His posture was rigid, his hands clasped tightly together. The once warm and inviting honeymoon retreat now felt cold and foreboding. The scarf's discovery, with its bloodstains and placement near the cliff's edge, only deepened the mystery. Something about Celine's disappearance didn't feel accidental. Every detail seemed slightly out of place, leaving the investigators with more questions than answers. The coastline, beautiful and untamed, had become a silent witness to a tragedy. Yet in the stillness of the night, it felt as though the answers were hidden, waiting to be uncovered. As the investigation continued, the suspicions surrounding Celine's disappearance grew heavier, pressing down on those searching for the truth. The first cracks in the narrative began to form, but they were only the beginning of a far darker revelation. Celine Whitaker's life had always revolved around the water. As a marine biologist from Charleston, South Carolina, she spent her days studying ecosystems and her evenings enjoying the gentle lapping of waves along the shoreline. Her friends admired her quiet determination, describing her as a kind soul who found comfort in nature's rhythm. When she met Arden Luxford at an environmental conference, she was drawn to his charm and creative outlook. Arden, a freelance graphic designer specializing in outdoor brand marketing, seemed to understand her in a way few others did. Their relationship progressed quickly. Within 6 months, Arden proposed during a weekend getaway in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Celine's friends and family were thrilled, though a few close to her noted subtle hesitations. Celine occasionally expressed concerns about Arden's reserved nature and the walls he seemed to keep around his past. She brushed off these feelings, telling herself that love was about acceptance and compromise. As the investigation into Celine's disappearance deepened, these hesitations gained new weight. Detective Asher Rowland, meticulous in his methods, began piecing together the dynamics of their relationship. Interviews with Celine's friends painted a picture of a woman deeply in love, but quietly grappling with questions about the man she had married. One friend, Evangeline Porter, recalled a conversation just weeks before the wedding. Celine had mentioned how Arden avoided discussing his past relationships. While she chalked it up to his private nature, it occasionally left her feeling like an outsider in her own relationship. She didn't say she was unhappy, Evangeline told investigators, but she wasn't entirely at peace either. Celine's parents echoed similar sentiments. Her father, a retired Navy officer, described Arden as polite but distant during family gatherings. He seemed polite enough, her father noted, pausing to choose his words carefully. But there was something about him that felt like he was always holding something back. The investigation also brought Arden's past into sharper focus. Before meeting Celine, he had been in a long-term relationship with Iona Delacroix, a wildlife photographer based in Seattle. Their relationship, spanning nearly 5 years, had ended abruptly. Colleagues of Iona's described her as adventurous and ambitious, but fiercely possessive. Arden, by contrast, appeared withdrawn during their final months together. Though he had moved on to marry Celine, it seemed that Iona had not. Police records revealed that Iona had contacted Arden multiple times in the months leading up to his wedding. While the content of these conversations remained unknown, the timing raised questions. Adding to the mystery was a detail unearthed by Detective Rowland. Iona had recently traveled to Sandcliffe Cove for a photography project coinciding with the couple's honeymoon. Arden's connection to Iona became a critical thread in the investigation. While he admitted to maintaining occasional contact with his ex, he claimed it was amicable and brief. However, text records between the two suggested otherwise. Messages retrieved from Arden's phone showed a level of familiarity that went beyond casual communication. Phrases like, "I'll explain when the time is right," and "It's complicated, but trust me," stood out as cryptic and potentially incriminating. By this point, Detective Rowland had established a timeline of events leading up to Celine's disappearance. The couple had arrived at Sandcliffe Cove 3 days before she went missing. On their first evening, they dined at a local seafood bistro, where witnesses noted Arden seemed distracted. On the second day, they hiked a nearby trail, though neighbors later reported hearing an argument from their cabin that night. On the surface, their honeymoon appeared ordinary, but cracks in the facade were beginning to show. The presence of Iona Delacroix in Sandcliffe Cove and her connection to Arden added a new layer of complexity. While the investigation had yet to uncover direct evidence implicating either Arden or Iona, their actions and histories painted a picture of simmering tensions and unresolved emotions. The focus shifted from a tragic accident to a more sinister possibility. As Rowland reviewed the pieces of the puzzle, he began to suspect that Celine's disappearance was no coincidence. Her life, full of quiet passion and purpose, had been interwoven with forces she could not have anticipated. The tranquil beauty of Sandcliffe Cove now seemed less like a retreat and more like the perfect stage for a carefully orchestrated tragedy. The question that lingered was simple but chilling. Had Celine been caught in the crossfire of a past Arden thought he had left behind? Detective Asher Rowland stood at the edge of the cliff where Celine Whitaker's scarf had been found. The jagged rock face dropped sharply to the churning ocean below, and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs echoed ominously. Despite the picturesque setting, Rowland could feel the weight of something sinister in the air. The clues thus far were sparse but unsettling: a blood-stained scarf, faint disturbances in the dirt near the edge, and an eerily calm husband. Back at the cabin, Arden Luxford sat at the dining table, his hands clasped tightly together as Rowland entered. The detective studied him silently for a moment before sitting across from him. Arden's posture was rigid, his face pale but composed. He answered the initial questions with measured precision, recounting the night Celine disappeared. "She told me she wanted to go for a walk," Arden explained. "She said the cliffs were beautiful under the moonlight. I stayed back. I had some sketches I wanted to finish." Rowland nodded as he jotted down notes. Arden's account seemed rehearsed, as if he had gone over it in his head multiple times. He asked about their activities leading up to that evening, and Arden described their day in careful detail: a hike on the nearby trails, a quiet dinner at a local bistro, and then their return to the cabin. Everything sounded ordinary, yet Rowland couldn't shake the sense that Arden was holding something back. The search team returned later that afternoon with more findings. The faint footprints near the cliff had been analyzed, revealing two distinct sets, one matching Celine's shoe size and the other consistent with Arden's. The prints suggested that Celine had walked toward the cliff, but there were irregularities. The scuff marks in the dirt hinted at a struggle, as if someone had been dragged or pushed. Meanwhile, Roland began interviewing locals in Sandcliffe Cove. Marjorie Hale, the neighbor who owned a nearby bed and breakfast, provided a crucial piece of information. She mentioned seeing Arden the night Celine disappeared. He had been walking along the cliffs, she said, carrying a flashlight and appearing agitated. He looked like he was searching for something, or someone, Marjorie told Roland. It struck me as odd. Why would he be out there so late at night? This observation didn't align with Arden's account of the evening. He had claimed he stayed in the cabin until early morning, only venturing out to look for Celine when the sun began to rise. Marjorie's testimony cast doubt on his timeline and strengthened Roland's suspicions. Adding to the growing unease was a report from the forensic team. The bloodstains on Celine's scarf were confirmed to be hers, and the placement of the scarf, caught on a jagged rock, suggested it had been left there intentionally, perhaps to create the illusion of an accident. Roland began to suspect that Celine's disappearance was not the result of a simple misstep, but something far more deliberate. As the investigation unfolded, Roland decided to dig deeper into Arden's background. A preliminary search revealed little: a modest freelance career, no criminal record, and few ties outside of his professional network. However, one name kept appearing in connection to Arden: Iona Delacroix. A wildlife photographer based in Seattle, Iona was listed as an emergency contact on several of Arden's past travel records. Roland found this curious given that Arden had not mentioned her during questioning. Further investigation into Iona's whereabouts revealed an intriguing detail. She had recently been in Sandcliffe Cove for a photography project, coinciding with Celine and Arden's honeymoon. Roland's instincts sharpened. Could Iona's presence be more than coincidence? The detective requested access to Arden's phone records, and what he found added another layer of complexity to the case. In the weeks leading up to the honeymoon, Arden and Iona had exchanged several text messages. While most were innocuous, some stood out for their cryptic tone. Phrases like, "It's better this way," and "We'll figure it out after," suggested a level of familiarity that exceeded casual conversation. One message from Iona read, "Don't let her get in the way." Roland's suspicions solidified. Arden and Iona appeared to share a connection that Celine may not have known about. As he pieced together the fragments of evidence, a potential motive began to emerge, one rooted in jealousy and unresolved emotions. But Roland knew he needed more than circumstantial evidence to make his case. He had to tread carefully lest he tip off Arden or Iona before he had enough to charge them. Returning to the cabin that evening, Roland observed Arden from a distance. The man's behavior was striking. He moved about the cabin with a strange combination of nervous energy and calculated restraint, as if he were aware that he was being watched, but unsure of what the police truly knew. The next morning, Roland called Arden in for a second round of questioning. This time, the detective pressed harder, asking pointed questions about the nature of his relationship with Celine and whether there had been any tension between them. Arden's answers grew less precise. He hesitated more, pausing before responding as if weighing his words carefully. When asked directly about Iona Delacroix, his composure faltered. "Iona, she's an old friend," he stammered. "We haven't spoken in years." But Roland knew better. The records told a different story. He ended the interview without revealing his hand, but left with a renewed determination to uncover the truth. Arden's facade was beginning to crack, and Roland was prepared to expose whatever lay beneath. As the sun set once more over Sandcliffe Cove, Roland stood at the edge of the cliff, staring down at the waves below. The case was far from solved, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. He had no doubt that Celine's disappearance was no accident. The only question now was how far Arden, and perhaps Iona, had gone to ensure she would never return. Detective Asher Roland turned his focus from physical evidence at Sandcliffe Cove to the people closest to Celine Whitaker. He knew that to uncover the truth, he had to understand Celine's relationships and the potential cracks in her seemingly idyllic life. Celine's family painted a portrait of a cautious, empathetic woman. Both her parents, retired Navy officers, described her as someone who rarely took unnecessary risks. Her father recalled that Celine was meticulous and deliberate in everything she did, making the circumstances of her disappearance even harder to understand. Her mother shared a more emotional perspective, reminiscing about how excited Celine had been for her honeymoon, but also revealing small hesitations before the wedding. Celine had confided in her mother about Arden's reserved nature and how he often avoided talking about his past. Although Celine never explicitly expressed mistrust, her mother sensed that her daughter sometimes felt disconnected from her husband. Roland expanded his investigation to Celine's closest friends. Evangeline Porter, her best friend, had been a bridesmaid at her wedding and knew Celine better than most. Evangeline described Celine as deeply in love with Arden, but admitted that her friend had been nervous in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Celine had mentioned Arden's emotional distance and the invisible barriers he seemed to maintain in their relationship. Evangeline also noted a specific incident in which Celine had caught Arden texting someone late at night. Although he had brushed it off as work-related, the encounter left Celine unsettled. Celine's colleagues at the Marine Biology Institute added further depth to the investigation. Her co-worker, Dr. Nora Patel, recalled how Celine had always been passionate about her research, but had seemed distracted in the weeks before her wedding. Nora mentioned that Celine once brought up a woman from Arden's past, someone he had described as complicated. While Celine had tried to downplay her concerns, Nora could tell the situation had left her uneasy. The more Roland learned, the clearer it became that Celine had been grappling with doubts about her relationship. However, there was no indication that she had openly voiced these concerns or taken action to address them. Roland expanded his search for information by questioning staff at the local bistro where Celine and Arden had dined the night before her disappearance. The server who attended to them described tension between the couple during their meal. Arden had appeared distracted, and Celine had seemed upset by something toward the end of the dinner. As Roland pieced together these accounts, he began to see a pattern. Celine's cautious nature and growing suspicions about Arden stood in stark contrast to the version of events Arden had presented. At the same time, his investigation into Iona Delacroix, Arden's former partner, continued to reveal troubling details. Iona's presence in Sandcliffe Cove during the couple's honeymoon, paired with cryptic messages between her and Arden, raised significant questions. By the end of the day, Roland had compiled enough evidence to deepen his suspicions. The cracks in Arden and Celine's marriage, coupled with the unresolved history between Arden and Iona, suggested a deliberate and premeditated act rather than an accident. The detective knew the next step was to confront Iona directly. Her role in the unfolding events might hold the key to understanding what had truly happened to Celine Whitaker. As the waves crashed relentlessly against the cliffs at Sandcliffe Cove, Roland felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him. Celine had been a woman who trusted her instincts and her heart, but something had gone terribly wrong. Roland resolved to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Detective Asher Roland knew that unraveling the mystery of Celine Whitaker's disappearance required delving deeper into the past. Arden Luxford's reserved demeanor and evasive answers had raised questions, but it was Iona Delacroix, the enigmatic figure from his history, who now demanded Roland's attention. Iona's professional profile painted her as a successful wildlife photographer, someone accustomed to traveling the world and navigating extreme environments. But beneath this image lay a more volatile narrative. She had been in a long-term relationship with Arden, one that colleagues described as tumultuous and emotionally draining. Their split had been sudden, leaving unresolved tension that now seemed to have resurfaced. Roland discovered that Iona had checked into a small inn near Sandcliffe Cove 2 days before Celine and Arden arrived for their honeymoon. Surveillance footage from the local market showed her purchasing supplies and leaving in a visibly agitated state. Phone records revealed frequent communication between Arden and Iona in the weeks leading up to Celine's disappearance. Although Arden had downplayed their connection, the messages hinted at something more than casual conversation. As Roland pieced together these clues, another lead emerged. An anonymous tipster contacted the Sandcliffe Police Department, claiming to have overheard a heated argument near the cliffs on the night Celine disappeared. The caller described voices, one male and one female, but couldn't identify who they belonged to. This testimony added weight to the theory that Celine's death was no accident. The detective next turned his attention to forensic evidence. Soil samples taken from the area where Celine's body was found matched traces found on Arden's hiking boots. The pattern of the footprints suggested someone had struggled near the edge of the cliff, with one set of prints leading directly to the site where Celine fell. Additionally, scratches on a nearby tree trunk indicated that Celine had likely tried to grab onto something to save herself. These details painted a chilling picture of her final moments. Roland decided it was time to speak with Iona directly. He traveled to Seattle, where she had returned following her brief stay in Sandcliff Cove. Iona initially refused to cooperate, citing her right to privacy, but Roland's persistence and mounting evidence left her little choice. During their meeting, Iona maintained her innocence. She admitted to meeting Arden before his wedding, but insisted their interactions were brief and unrelated to Celine. However, her composure faltered when Roland presented her with evidence of her proximity to Sandcliff Cove during the honeymoon and her communication with Arden. A single phrase from one of her messages, "She doesn't deserve this," stood out, suggesting that her feelings toward Celine were far from neutral. Roland also pressed Iona about the argument near the cliffs. Her initial denial crumbled under questioning. She admitted to meeting Arden at Sandcliff Cove during Celine's absence, but claimed she had no involvement in what happened next. According to her, Arden had confided that his marriage was a mistake and that he felt trapped. Iona portrayed herself as a sympathetic ear rather than a conspirator, but Roland was unconvinced. Meanwhile, back in Sandcliff Cove, another breakthrough occurred. A local hiker, reviewing photos taken on the trail that evening, noticed something unusual in one of their shots: a shadowy figure standing near the cliff's edge. Although the image was blurry, the silhouette matched Arden's build. This discovery placed Arden at the scene during a critical time frame, further undermining his claims of innocence. The growing body of evidence led Roland to bring Arden back in for questioning. This time, the detective adopted a more aggressive approach. He confronted Arden with the footprints, the soil samples, and the photograph. He also shared Iona's partial admission of her presence in Sandcliff Cove. Arden's calm exterior began to crack. He initially denied everything, but under the pressure of Roland's questions, his story began to unravel. He admitted to arguing with Celine on the night she disappeared, claiming it was over her suspicions about his relationship with Iona. However, he insisted her fall was accidental, a tragic misstep during their heated exchange. Roland didn't believe him. The evidence suggested intent, not an accident. Arden's history with Iona, the timeline of events, and Celine's cautious nature all pointed to a calculated act rather than a spur-of-the-moment tragedy. Still, the detective needed more to secure a conviction. That more came from an unexpected source. A forensic analysis of Arden's phone revealed a deleted voice memo recorded the night of Celine's disappearance. The audio captured part of their argument, with Celine demanding answers about Iona. Arden's voice was calm but chilling as he dismissed her concerns. The recording abruptly cut off, leaving an eerie silence that spoke volumes. With this new evidence, Roland was able to formally charge Arden with Celine's murder. Iona, though implicated as an accomplice, continued to deny direct involvement. Her role in the case remained murky, but her connection to Arden ensured she would face legal scrutiny as well. As the chapter closed on the investigation, Roland reflected on the tragedy that had unfolded. Celine had been a bright, compassionate woman who placed her trust in the wrong person. Her love for Arden had blinded her to the dangers lurking beneath his charm. The cliffs of Sandcliff Cove, once a place of beauty, had become a symbol of betrayal and loss. But for Roland, the work wasn't over. He knew that justice for Celine would come not only in the courtroom, but also in uncovering every last piece of the truth. The cliffs at Sandcliff Cove stood stoic against the relentless waves, concealing the secrets of Celine Whitaker's final moments. After days of extensive searching, the breakthrough came when a team of hikers ventured deeper into the ravines, where the dense underbrush made the terrain nearly impassable. It was here that Celine's body was discovered, tangled among sharp rocks at the bottom of a steep incline. The scene was grim. Celine's clothes were torn, and her hands bore deep scratches, indicating a desperate attempt to stop her fall. A forensic team quickly descended upon the area, documenting every inch of the site. The evidence suggested that Celine had not simply stumbled over the edge. The trajectory of her fall and the injuries she sustained told a different story, one of struggle and force. As the medical examiner prepared a report, Detective Asher Rowland examined the evidence with growing unease. The positioning of Celine's body, combined with the disturbed soil and drag marks near the cliff's edge, pointed to foul play. But the most damning discovery was the ligature marks on Celine's wrists, hidden beneath her sleeves. They were faint but undeniable, suggesting she had been restrained at some point before her death. The discovery reframed the case entirely. This was no longer a question of whether Celine's death was accidental, but of who had killed her and why. The autopsy report confirmed what Rowland had feared. Celine had suffered a blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being struck by a heavy object. While the injuries from her fall were fatal, the blow to her head had rendered her unconscious before she tumbled over the edge. This meant someone had attacked her with intent and staged the fall as a cover-up. Back at the station, Rowland laid out the mounting evidence. Arden Luxford's behavior was increasingly suspicious, but now the physical evidence tied him closer to the scene. Soil samples from his hiking boots matched those found at the cliffside. Witness accounts, including the anonymous tip and Marjorie Hale's observation of Arden near the cliffs, painted a picture of a man who was present when Celine met her end. Rowland also revisited Iona Delacroix's connection to the case. Her proximity to Sandcliff Cove during the honeymoon and her cryptic text messages to Arden hinted at a deeper involvement. The detective questioned whether Iona had been a direct accomplice or merely a catalyst for Arden's actions. A chilling new piece of evidence surfaced when a member of the forensic team reviewed Celine's phone. The device had suffered significant water damage, but technicians were able to recover fragments of data. Among the recovered files was a partial video, recorded just hours before her death. In the footage, Celine appeared visibly distressed, speaking to the camera in hushed tones. "I don't know who to trust anymore," she said. "Arden's been acting strange, and I keep seeing that woman, whoever she is. I think something's wrong." The video ended abruptly, but it was enough to suggest that Celine had feared for her safety. Rowland wondered if Celine had finally uncovered Arden's connection to Iona and confronted him about it, triggering the tragic events that followed. The tension escalated when Rowland received a call from a park ranger stationed near the cliffs. A bloodied rock, partially buried in the dirt, had been found during a secondary sweep of the area. The rock, consistent with the shape of Celine's head wound, was quickly sent for analysis. Preliminary tests revealed traces of Celine's blood and, crucially, fingerprints that matched Arden's. With this evidence, Rowland prepared to confront Arden. The detective also decided to bring Iona back in for further questioning. Her earlier denials had done little to dispel suspicion, and Rowland was convinced that she knew more than she had let on. When Arden was called in for interrogation, he remained composed, but Rowland noticed subtle cracks in his demeanor. The detective methodically presented the evidence: the soil samples, the video, and now the bloodied rock. Arden's calm exterior began to crumble. "You were there," Rowland stated bluntly, leaning forward in his chair. "You argued with Celine, and something happened. Did she confront you about Iona? Did she find out what you were planning?" Arden denied everything, but his voice wavered. "I loved her," he insisted. "Why would I hurt her?" Rowland countered with the facts. "You didn't love her enough to let go of your past. The text messages between you and Iona tell a different story. She didn't deserve this. Your words." For the first time, Arden faltered. His shoulders slumped, and his gaze dropped to the table. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he muttered, almost inaudibly. While Arden's partial admission was a breakthrough, Rowland knew Iona still held vital pieces of the puzzle. The detective traveled to Seattle to confront her once more, armed with the new evidence. Iona initially maintained her earlier narrative, claiming she had only spoken to Arden out of concern for his well-being. But when presented with the video of Celine and the forensic findings, her composure cracked. "I didn't kill her," Iona said, her voice trembling, "but I warned him to stop before it got out of hand." When pressed, Iona admitted to meeting Arden at Sandcliff Cove during the honeymoon. She described their encounter as tense, with Arden expressing frustration over his relationship with Celine. According to Iona, Arden felt trapped in a marriage he no longer wanted. While she denied conspiring with Arden, her account placed her closer to the events than she had previously acknowledged. As Roland pieced together the confessions, evidence, and timelines, the motive became clear. Arden had been unable to let go of his connection to Iona, and Celine's suspicions had pushed him to a breaking point. Confronted with the truth, Arden had lashed out, silencing Celine in a moment of desperation. Iona's role, while less direct, had fueled the volatile dynamics that led to Celine's death. The discovery of Celine's body and the subsequent investigation had unraveled a web of lies, jealousy, and betrayal. Roland prepared to file charges against both Arden and Iona, determined to ensure that justice would be served. As Detective Asher Roland prepared to finalize his case against Arden Luxford, an unexpected turn of events threw the investigation into turmoil. A forensic reanalysis of the evidence uncovered a new and chilling detail. A strand of hair found on Celine's clothing did not belong to Arden, Celine, or Iona. This revelation suggested the involvement of a fourth person, someone who had not yet surfaced in the investigation. The discovery reignited Roland's determination to dig deeper. He ordered a full review of all individuals who had been in the vicinity of Sandcliff Cove during the honeymoon. Among the names was a local handyman, Eric Vance, who had been hired to perform routine maintenance on the trail near the cliffs. Roland recalled seeing Vance's name in passing during earlier reviews of maintenance logs, but hadn't considered him a suspect. Now, with the hair sample pointing to an unidentified presence, Vance's proximity to the crime scene demanded closer scrutiny. Vance was a drifter, known in the community for taking odd jobs and keeping to himself. Roland arranged an interview, and Vance's demeanor immediately raised red flags. His answers were evasive, and he seemed unusually anxious when questioned about his work schedule on the day Celine disappeared. He claimed he had been repairing a broken trail marker near the opposite end of the cliffs and had not seen or interacted with anyone. However, when Roland cross-referenced Vance's statements with witness accounts, discrepancies began to emerge. A hiker had reported seeing a man matching Vance's description near the cliffs at sunset, the same time Celine was believed to have disappeared. Further investigation revealed that Vance had a history of violence, including an assault charge from years earlier that had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. Roland decided to conduct a search of Vance's small, rundown cabin on the outskirts of Sandcliff Cove. What he found was both unsettling and incriminating. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was a collection of items that didn't belong to Vance. A bracelet Celine's mother later confirmed as her daughter's, a torn piece of fabric matching the color of Celine's blouse, and a notebook filled with erratic, obsessive writings about Celine. The notebook painted a disturbing picture of a man who had been watching Celine from afar, fixating on her beauty and grace. It contained crude sketches of her, accompanied by ramblings about wanting to rescue her from her unworthy husband. The writings hinted at a growing delusion that Arden was a threat to Celine, further complicating the motive behind her death. With this new evidence, Roland brought Vance in for a second interrogation. This time, the handyman's composure shattered. He initially denied everything, but under the weight of Roland's questioning and the mounting evidence, he began to unravel. He admitted to watching Celine during her walks along the trail, describing how he felt an unexplainable connection to her. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Vance muttered, his voice trembling. "It was an accident. I just wanted to talk to her, but she got scared." According to Vance's confession, he had followed Celine to the cliffs that evening, intending to approach her. When she noticed him, she became visibly alarmed and tried to leave. Vance claimed he grabbed her arm to stop her from running, but the situation escalated. In his panic, he struck her with a rock to silence her screams. And when she fell unconscious, he staged the scene to make it look like an accident. Although Vance's confession seemed to tie up loose ends, Roland couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Arden Luxford's connection to the crime still loomed large, particularly given his suspicious behavior, the text messages with Iona, and his partial admission during questioning. Roland suspected that Arden and Vance's involvement might not be entirely separate. A breakthrough came when forensic technicians analyzed Vance's cell phone. Text records revealed an exchange with an unknown number shortly before Celine's death. The messages were cryptic, but suggested coordination. Unknown number. "She'll be at the cliffs tonight. Don't screw this up." Vance, I'll handle it. Just make sure you keep your end of the deal. Tracing the number led Roland back to Arden Luxford. The evidence suggested that Arden had orchestrated Celine's death, using Vance as an unwitting accomplice. Arden's motive became clearer. By removing Celine, he could free himself from a marriage he no longer wanted while concealing his ongoing relationship with Iona. Vance, delusional and easily manipulated, had been the perfect pawn. Roland confronted Arden with the new findings. This time, Arden's facade completely crumbled. Under the pressure of mounting evidence and the damning text messages, he confessed to orchestrating the crime. He admitted to meeting Vance during a chance encounter at Sandcliffe Cove and exploiting the handyman's obsession with Celine. Arden had fed Vance the idea that Celine was in danger, manipulating him into believing he was rescuing her. When Celine began to suspect Arden's infidelity and confronted him about Iona, Arden saw an opportunity to put his plan into action. He lured Celine to the cliffs under the guise of a romantic walk, ensuring that Vance would be waiting nearby. While Vance delivered the fatal blow, Arden staged his alibi and worked to cover his tracks. With Arden's confession, Roland finally had the answers he needed. Both Arden and Vance were charged with Celine's murder, their fates intertwined in a web of deceit and manipulation. Iona Delacroix, though indirectly involved, faced charges as an accessory, her role in enabling Arden's actions undeniable. As the case came to a close, Roland reflected on the complexity of the human psyche and the lengths people would go to satisfy their desires. Celine Whitaker's life had been cut short by the very people she trusted, a tragic reminder of how love and obsession could turn deadly. The trial of Arden Luxford and Eric Vance drew national attention, with the media dubbing the case the tragic Honeymoon murder. Prosecutors laid out the intricate details of the crime, emphasizing Arden's calculated manipulation of Vance and the cold-hearted betrayal of his wife, Celine Whitaker. The courtroom was tense as evidence was presented, the damning text messages, the forensic matches, and Vance's chilling confession. Eric Vance, portrayed as a pawn in Arden's scheme, expressed remorse during his testimony. His delusions and obsession with Celine had made him an easy target for Arden's manipulation. Arden, however, remained stoic throughout the trial, his lack of emotion only solidifying the jury's perception of him as a remorseless mastermind. Iona Delacroix testified under immunity for her role in exposing Arden's motives, though her reputation was irreparably tarnished. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just a few hours. Arden was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and manipulation of a vulnerable individual. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Vance, while convicted of second-degree murder, received a reduced sentence due to his cooperation and diminished capacity defense. Iona faced charges as an accessory, but avoided jail time in exchange for her testimony. As the dust settled, Detective Asher Rowland reflected on the case. Celine Whitaker's death was a tragedy that revealed the darker side of human nature, how love, when twisted by selfishness and obsession, could lead to devastating consequences. Her story was a sobering reminder of the importance of trust, communication, and recognizing red flags in relationships. The case also shed light on the dangers of manipulation and the vulnerability of those struggling with their own insecurities or delusions. Eric Vance's descent into obsession highlighted the need for mental health awareness and support, particularly in small communities where such issues often go unnoticed. For the Whitaker family, closure came not through vengeance, but through the knowledge that Celine's story would serve as a cautionary tale for others. They established the Celine Whitaker Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness about the signs of toxic relationships and the importance of seeking help before conflicts escalate.